And let's check in with Ian Casselberry for our Major League Baseball update. And boy, we've got did I say baseball? I meant NFL update, but we are starting with some Major League Baseball baseball because David Ortiz, as I said at the top of the show, opening his mouth, and I'm not nuts about it. Maybe Ian is. Ian's appearance, of course, presented today by David Creasman and DC Creasman Jewelers. Ian, how are you, lad?
I'm okay.
David Ortiz basically calling Mike Fiers, who was with the Houston Astros during that 2017 cheating season. He's now with the A's. He kind of exposed the whole operation. But David Ortiz calling Mike Fiers a snitch. I thought, wow, it's almost like, what is David Ortiz protecting the guilty here? That rubbed me the wrong way. But what's your thought on that?
He may be protecting the guilty. I still don't know what the Major League Baseball's investigation into the Boston Red Sox sign stealing scheme is going to turn out. So it's possible that there's a lot of people who are worried about people breaking the clubhouse code or the player omerta. What happens in the clubhouse should stay in the clubhouse. I have a feeling that David Ortiz is not expressing a minority view there. He's just being more public about it, and he does have more name recognition. Being David Ortiz, I don't know if you or the listeners remember Jessica Mendoza, ESPN's former Sunday Night Baseball analyst, expressed a similar view on TV, on First Take and Get Up and Sports Center, and she was roundly criticized for that, not only because of criticizing Fiers for being a snitch, but there was some thought that maybe she had a conflict of interest there because she was working for the New York Mets, and the Mets at that time were wondering what to do about Carlos Beltran, who was involved in the Astros sign-stealing scheme. I'm not crazy about David Ortiz saying this. I don't agree with his sentiment, but again, I would be surprised if there aren't more players who do actually feel that way.
Oh, there are going to be a ton of players that feel that way. It just, once again, here we go. I mean, a guy that comes forward and, you can agree or disagree with what went down, but, I get tired of this. It's like, these guys were in the wrong again. The Astros, right? Here we go. It's like, suddenly now, according to David Ortiz, it's like the Astros are the victim here. That's getting a little bit old. But let's get into some NFL goodies. I just wanted to run that past you and get your thoughts. All right, Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow, late of LSU, Ian, looks to be the number one overall draft pick coming up in late April. Cincinnati does have the first pick. So why is Burrow saying he has, quote, leverage on the Bengals?
Yeah, this seems like a perfect situation, right? Burrow, he's from Ohio, playing for the almost hometown Cincinnati Bengals. They need a quarterback. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. It seems like a perfect situation. But whether it's because Burrow is wary of playing for the Cincinnati Bengals, or maybe his agents are telling him, hey, that we've had trouble with them before. I don't know if Carson Palmer, whose brother is working with Joe Burrow in the offseason, has planted any seeds about his experiences with the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think this is also a negotiating tactic. I think Burrow and his people, it seems like a foregone conclusion that Burrow's going to be the number one pick by Cincinnati, but maybe Burrow is trying to use whatever bargaining power he might have and saying, well, I could still sit out. I mean, this isn't a situation where Burrow plays baseball or something like that, or could go to another sport, but he could sit out the season, and that would be disastrous for Cincinnati. Not only would they be out their number one overall draft pick and presumably out of a quarterback, depending on what they do with Andy Dalton. And then that's just a bad message to the rest of the league. Free agents, do they want to come to Cincinnati if a guy doesn't want to play for them? It's in the Bengals' best interest to make sure Joe Burrow is their number one draft pick and is signed, and that's a smooth process.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a smooth start when, Burrow's already saying I've got leverage on the team that's going to be drafting me. That, to me, that's a bit of a red flag. We'll see how that one plays out, but it's out there in the ether now. I want to get your thoughts as well, Ian. Mike Tomlin was on ESPN and was asked about bringing Antonio Brown back. Of course, we were talking just last week about the Antonio Brown apology tour, apologized to the NFL. He's apologized to the Steelers. But Mike Tomlin, what's his thinking on all of this?
He kind of took a diplomatic stance at first, saying once a Steeler, always a Steeler. But then he got pretty cold and saying we have no current business interest in Antonio Brown at this time. So deep down, I would think Mike Tomlin wants nothing to do with Antonio Brown. All the problems that they had to deal with Brown during the 2018 season, how things ended there with Brown being a problem at practice, missing the final game of the season, the difficulties that he had with Ben Roethlisberger and Juju Smith-Schuster. The Steelers don't really need Antonio Brown. Not to say that they couldn't use him, but they are set with Juju Smith-Schuster as their number one receiver. James Washington had a good year. Deontay Johnson, their number 3 receiver. I'm sure that the Steelers will look for a wide receiver in the draft, whether later in the draft, just to add some depth. But I think Mike Tomlin wants nothing to do with Antonio Brown if he has the opportunity.
Yeah, heck, and he's already gone through enough answering the whole Mason Rudolph, Myles Garrett scenario, where Myles Garrett, in an interview with ESPN, right, still claims that Mason Rudolph used a racial slur. Mason Rudolph says 1,000% not true. Mike Tomlin says he's spoken to players who were right around in that general area. None of them can back up what Myles Garrett says. And this is why I love Mike Tomlin. He says, I've looked into it, and I'm not seeing anything that supports that. I support my quarterback 100%. God, we need more Mike Tomlins, not only in the sports world, but just in the world, Ian.
We definitely do. I mean, he's no nonsense. He cracks the authority, lets it be known, and tries to nip potential situations in the bud as soon as possible. And you can see why he would hate having Antonio Brown around for that reason, because it's always something with AB, right? And so no coaches want distractions, but Mike Tomlin is certainly very adept at making sure little things don't become big things.
No kidding. I can just sit there all day and just listen to him talk. Mike Tomlin, my man. All right, Ian Casselberry, my guy too. Of course, presented by DC Creasman Jewelers. It's an NFL Gold Nuggets feature for this Thursday. Hey, any new potential suitors for Phillip Rivers? You're not hearing much out there right now.
No, his former teammate Melvin Gordon, running back, told the Indianapolis Star that he thinks, although he doesn't really have any evidence to support this, but he thinks Phillip Rivers is going to sign with the Colts. And the reason he gave was that the Colts offensive coordinator, Nick Sirianni, was an assistant with the Chargers for 5 years. Frank Reich was also a quarterback's coach for the Chargers in 2013. So there is some relationship, some familiarity between Phillip Rivers and the offensive staff. I'm still a little skeptical that the Colts are going to go after Phillip Rivers. They're paying Jacoby Brissett quite a bit. But Rivers, I think most would agree, is an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett. And I think the Colts would welcome having Phillip Rivers for 1 to 2 years. But you're right, the market seems to have cooled a little bit. We mentioned Tampa Bay as a potential stop for Phillip Rivers, but there hasn't apparently been any follow-up with that. Maybe this is going to be a situation where we have to wait to see what Tom Brady and the New England Patriots do with their potential re-upping with a contract, and all the dominoes will fall from there.
Yeah, I think Phillip Rivers, we were talking about this with Keith Jarrett recently. I was saying, what about the Panthers? Cam out, and maybe if Cam leaves, maybe Phillip Rivers for a year or two, develop another quarterback. But again, he brings up the salary issue with Phillip Rivers. He's probably going to be going for $25 million a year, maybe more. And I got to think teams are not going to go for that for a 38-year-old coming off arguably his worst season of his career. So you got to think Phillip Rivers, Ian, may have to be a little more flexible on the money?
Yeah, he might have to. The market may make those terms go down a little bit. But, NFL teams are so quarterback crazy. And even though, as you point out, Rivers had an off year last year, he is proven. And if you have a team that has a decent offense with some good receivers and you plug Phillip Rivers into that offense, it's potentially a very good situation, which is one reason why I think a lot of experts and fans are pointing to teams like the Buccaneers and the Colts, imagining Phillip Rivers running those offenses.
Yeah, we'll wait and see, man. Again, there's so many questions this offseason, and one of them is, where's Phillip Rivers going to land? Because God knows he needs the money, because he's the father of 65
20 kids, right?
No kidding. His family is like an entire zip code. All right, Ian, let's move on to Drew Brees. Speaking of quarterbacks, he is going to return to the Saints. That's great news for Saints fans, not so much maybe for Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill. We talked about this recently, and who's going to be the odd man out here?
I still think it's going to be Taysom Hill because, again, if he could be Drew Brees' backup, I think Sean Payton would have installed him as the backup already. But there could be a situation where Teddy Bridgewater gets an offer from another team that the Saints don't want to match. In that case, maybe Taysom Hill has to step up. But boy, oh boy, I mean, when Drew Brees got injured this past season and Teddy Bridgewater stepped in, no, he's not Drew Brees, and he did struggle in his first game. But for the most part, he did play pretty well and reminded people of why Teddy Bridgewater was highly regarded at one point. I still think if Sean Payton has his preference, Teddy Bridgewater would be Drew Brees' backup, and Taysom Hill is still an unproven commodity as a quarterback. I think he's better suited, and Sean Payton probably is more comfortable with him in that sort of utility role that he plays in the Saints offense. I have to say I was a little bit surprised Drew Brees decided to come back. Not to say that he can't play, another great season, but I know, CBS and ESPN reportedly were after him as a potential broadcaster. If CBS loses Tony Romo, ESPN has been looking for a big name in that Monday Night Football booth that maybe Drew Brees would take the broadcasting dollars. But either of those gigs could be there next season as well, and I think Drew Brees still thinks the Saints can win another championship and wants to take another shot.
Sure. I have Michael Thomas and Kamara. I'm coming back if I'm able. And what's interesting about Taysom Hill, I'm still convinced, Ian, that if it was anyone other than Sean Payton, okay, maybe Andy Reid could make heads or tails and use Taysom Hill the way that Sean Payton does. But to me, I almost feel like if he becomes a free agent and he goes out on the market, I don't know if he's going to be as successful as maybe some folks think, because I just think being in Sean Payton's system and that mind really plays to his strengths. But I think the other 31 coaches and maybe 30 coaches in the NFL aren't really thinking that way.
If there's an owner or a general manager who's really enamored with Taysom Hill, I mean, this has the potential to just be an all-time mistake if you give him your starting quarterback job when he's so unproven. As we said last week, 15 career attempts in the National Football League. I mean, that's only 15 more attempts than you or I have, Pat. Yeah. Not to say that either of us could play quarterback for the Saints either, but
True.
Our throwing resume, not that different.
Yeah, we'll see on that. I like Taysom Hill. I mean, I think he's great in that type of offense, but I think that's a special offense tailored to his skills, and I'm not sure if there's another coach out there that would have that kind of success. And quite frankly, Taysom Hill's experience is somewhat limited, as you point out. He's done well, but it's still, when you look at the bigger picture, it's still kind of a fairly small sample. Ian Casselberry joins the Wise Guys, presented by David Creasman and DC Creasman Jewelers. All right, how about some collective bargaining agreement news? Ian, NFL owners are supporting a revised playoff format along with a 17-game schedule. All right, Ian, how do you think the Players Union will respond? And tell us about the playoff format, because that's an interesting one.
I don't think the players are crazy about playing a 17th game. Richard Sherman, for one, has been very outspoken against it. But if there are enough concessions to at least make the players agreeable, whether it's relaxing the standards on marijuana, there is a financial aspect to it. They would get a 17th game check. And also, I didn't know this, maybe you were familiar with this, that teams that had a playoff bye didn't get a check for that week in previous years. But with this new setup that they're talking about, one playoff team, the team with the best record in each conference, would still get a first-round bye, and they would get paid for that week. So if there are enough concessions, taking away a preseason game is another. I think the players will come around. Ultimately, this is all about money, and if the players get a bigger piece of it, a bigger percentage of revenues, I think they will come around. It's
funny as you're mentioning that, like, hey, they'll get paid during the bye week. It's going through my head. Yeah, just keep adding to it. Just keep adding to the package. Just throw more money at the players. Eventually, yes, they're going to. It's going to be too much for them not to agree not to do this. So it looks like it's heading in that direction, and they're going to add more teams to couple more teams into the playoffs. I do like that. I think that's pretty cool. And if the players are on board with the 17 game schedule, then who am I or anyone else to say that is wrong? Ian,
Pat, are you?
Yeah.
Real quick though.
Yeah.
Are you ready for 6 games on Wild Card Weekend? I mean, I love football. I love the playoffs, but 3 games Saturday, 3 games Sunday. That is a lot of football.
Ian, I am ready for it. Yes.
All right.
You know what I'm not ready for? The XFL in February.
Oh, yeah. I watched a little bit of that. Oh, man, we could devote a whole segment to the XFL.
You know what? We'll come back at you next week. Remind me. And I want to get your thoughts on the XFL. Hey, by the way, are your Lions looking to trade one of their top defensive players?
It certainly appears that they are. There are reports that the Lions want to trade a cornerback, Darius Slay, arguably their best defensive player, certainly one of the top cornerbacks in the league, but his salary, he has 1 more year left on his contract. He would like an extension. The Lions aren't sure they want to pay him what he would cost, as a top player at his position. So there are reports that the Lions are looking to trade him either to the Los Angeles Rams. So that would be quite a combination there with Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay, or the Denver Broncos, who it appears they're going to lose Chris Harris. So Darius Slay would fit in very well there. Also, from the Lions standpoint, if the draft holds the way it does with the Lions having the number 3 pick and Joe Burrow goes first, Chase Young goes second, a lot of mock drafts have Ohio State cornerback Jeff Okudah going to the Lions. So they would have a replacement ready for Darius Slay from the draft. But as a Lions fan, they traded Quandre Diggs last season. Darius Slay and other Lions were very outspoken about how much they did not like that. Matt Patricia, of that Bill Belichick, the culture, the team, don't speak up, kind of playing whack-a-mole with anybody who expresses an opinion, apparently would like to get Darius Slay out of that locker room. I don't see how they're a better team without Darius Slay, but it certainly looks like that's the way the Lions are leaning.
Well, it looks like the struggle continues for your people, Ian.
Let's also devote an entire, I'm sure Blades has talked about this too, how all the Detroit teams are just garbage right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know what we ought to do? We ought to have a special Detroit segment with you guys.
Oh, if the listeners, kept it tuned in to 1310, 970 AM, sure.
Well, I think they would, because hearing sport, especially someone like Blades being near tears, I think it would make for fun radio. I'm just saying.
Brutal. It's brutal. They're all in last place. It's never been like this.
Oh man, that's a bigger struggle for Lions fans who are used to big struggles. So hang in there, my friend.
We still love those Lions. I don't know what's the matter with us.
I know, man. It's hereditary. Hey, man, be good. I always appreciate you. Have a great weekend.
All right. Be safe out there.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ian, so much, as always. Ian Casselberry with the Wise Guys. Ian's appearance talking NFL Gold Nuggets presented by David Creasman and DC Creasman Jewelers.